At the end of the last class, I said that in this class, we were going to use our fieldwork to talk about a couple questions. What is the relationship between culture and contemporary globalization? And how does consumer culture become hegemonic? The idea of hegemony. And as I was saying that, I realized that we really hadn't dealt with this idea of hegemony at all. And you may want to do that. Try to figure out try to say something about these questions. These questions may be too big for us to do anything more than speculate on, but we'll try. So, the first thing I want you to think about is in the last class, we talked about the hammer tool of culture. Now, oftentimes, culture is used in anthropology and is important to anthropology and is still important in today's world, but it might sometimes be overused. And it also sometimes is used by people to get away from issues of power and inequality. So what Guest will be doing throughout this textbook, we're going to try to do in this class, is that whenever we talk about culture and issues of culture and whatever topic we're going to be talking about, we're going to be dealing with issues of power as well. Now, when I say the word power, what do you usually think of in terms of power? Yeah, government. Why? So government power, the ability to, how do they do that? What happens if you're doing something that the government doesn't like? What are they going to do? Get arrested? They might put you into handcuffs. They might throw you in a jail cell. The point of the matter is, when we talk about power like that, what we're talking about is like coercive power. That is to say, I or the government or somebody can have a rule and then they can make you do it. Like if you don't do it, something bad happens to you. Now, not all societies have governments which have coercive force. Later on, I'm hoping to show you a classic film in anthropology called Unca's Big Mocha. In that film, the person who's the big person there, Unca, is trying to get people to do something. But as the anthropologists say, he doesn't have any coercive power over them. He can't handcuff them or throw them in jail. He can only try to persuade them to do things. So we all know the power as coercive force. But in this case, when we think about hegemony, what we're talking about is something that is perhaps more subtle. Now, what anthropologists and other social scientists mean by hegemony, as Guest tells us, is the ability of a dominant group to create consent and agreement within a population without the use or threat of force. Now, as long as we're talking about clothing, which most of you said you needed before you discovered the New York State laws, I would say that as a rule, it's rather hegemonic that we wear clothes, right? Nobody's really threatening me with force for the most part. I just do it. I don't want to not do it. Or even if I didn't want to do it, I'd probably want to do it. It's just consent. We agree that that's a good thing to have in life. And it's that you don't need to use threat or force to do that. Now, usually when people refer to the use of hegemony, they're talking about something where the powerful, a dominant group, is able to create agreement or consent basically about their own system of power. So in the United States, for example, we might say that the capitalist system is rather hegemonic. Now, many people are not benefiting from the capitalist system. Few of us are billionaires. There's a lot of inequality and there's a lot of people who have very little. But many people in the United States buy into the system. They think they're going to be a billionaire, or maybe they just think they're better off than somebody else. And so for the most part, even though people might not be a part of the dominant group and they might not be benefiting, they're nevertheless going along and agreeing with things and just chilling out for the most part. So that's what hegemony is. And the idea or the word hegemony comes to us from the Italian political philosopher Antonio Gramsci. The wonderful thing about today's world is you can just go on YouTube and get like a cool YouTube theory of hegemony. You don't have to listen to me. You can talk to somebody else who's talked to Gramsci. Well, he didn't talk to Gramsci about the theory of hegemony and will explain it to you. Now, a couple things about Gramsci. One is, poor guy, he wasn't in the best of health all of his life, and as you can see, he only made it to 46 years of age. So that's sad. And he wrote about hegemony in a book or in a series of books which were called the Prison Notebooks. The reason he was writing, wow, it's good we've been talking about being in jail. The reason they were called the Prison Notebooks is that he wrote them from prison, from being in jail. Now, he was in jail because he was a communist. He was a revolutionary, and he wanted to bring a more revolutionary approach to Italy. So there he was, stuck in jail. Some people say that the reason he used words like hegemony is because he didn't want to get censored by the people who were reading his work before it went outside of jail. And so he wrote in this very confusing way and used big words like hegemony so nobody would know what he was talking about. However, whatever that case may be, it nevertheless leads to this concept that has been used later about the idea of hegemony as a form of power which is by consent or agreement. And so it's been a very productive idea, again, among anthropologists and others, to talk about whether something is hegemonic. Does the dominant class have consent or agreement within the population? So for those of you who are waiting for the sickle part in the hammer and sickle, the culture as hammer and hegemony as sickle, there you go. You have the Italian political theorist and hopefully revolutionary. The reason he was so concerned about hegemony is because he wanted revolution to come to Italy and he couldn't figure out, hey, why isn't it happening? Why am I here in jail instead of at the forefront of the revolution? And he thought it's because most people, even if they aren't benefiting from this system, are agreeing to it or consent to it. Now, these days, what's nice is not only can you go on YouTube, you can go to Redbubble and buy a poster. It's interesting that a phrase like this has now become part of consumer culture. I don't know if you need this for your dorm room. Some of you said you needed posters and decorations, but there's one where you can get it. So there you go. You can get that. Actually, I went back and found out what else I could get. There it is. Antonio Gramsci, Hegemony, Culture War. This is a sticker. You can get it on your water bottle. So it's interesting, right? Again, I tell you that if you have the culture tool and the hegemony tool, then you got something. I know. So this is just interesting things that are going on in consumer culture. But we might note that one of those ironies, right? Here's Gramsci coming up with the idea of hegemony and how capitalism has created this idea of consent in the world. And now people are like selling his stuff from like water bottles and things like that. So we might say that consumer culture has become so hegemonic that if you want to start a revolution, dissent, first you got to sell your merch, right? And so if you want to fight somebody, the first thing you do is you go out and get your t-shirts going, or as Billy Bragg reminded us a long time ago, before all this consumer culture stuff even got as big as it is now, the revolution is just a t-shirt away. And so we have this weird paradox, right? And I think it applies to many of our political parties. You go on there and you think you're going to get some political talk, and you go on and somebody's selling sneakers and parts of a suit, selling you gold bars, all kinds of things, selling you merch. It's an interesting phenomenon in our world. So again, this idea of hegemony, the idea of power, is something that we'll be returning to throughout. And I just want to put that out as part of our consumer culture thing. Now, one of the things that we also talked about are ideas of needs and wants. And many of you in your fieldwork reflections went into this to varying degrees. What is a need and what is a want? Do I really need this or do I only want it? And what anthropology teaches us is that the line between what is a need and what is a want is actually culturally made. We might say culturally constructed. It changes from society to society. It changes over time. It's not the same in different places. And what might initially be a want can become a need, right? If you keep using the same thing, what you only thought you wanted becomes a need for you. Now, I'll give you a couple examples of this. First of all, shampoo. Some of you describe shampoo as a need. You need it? Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. Oh.
You die if you don't use it.
You won't die if you don't use shampoo. It'd just be gross. When I was growing up, my grandfather was an immigrant from Italy, and he told us that where he lived in Italy, they bathed 3 times a year. Christmas, Easter, and at the town festival when all these people would come in from all over the place and sell things, and it was like a carnival time, maybe like a Mardi Gras time. And on those 3 occasions, people would go down the river and bathe their bodies. That was it. So obviously, you don't need shampoo. Or as my great-grandfather said, in this country, they make you bathe once a week, whether you need to or not. I know, exactly. It seems like not enough for us, but that was his perspective. Didn't even need to, and they were making him take a bath. Oh my gosh, right? So what I'm trying to say is that these needs are actually socially made. Even in my own family, I can go back a couple generations and they didn't need shampoo. However, I certainly feel like I need shampoo. I feel like that's a need. And the scientists will tell you that the more you use shampoo, the more you need shampoo. And so you don't want to stop using it now because things get bad. So it becomes a biological need as you go along. So this is an interesting case. Now, let's talk about cell phones. A lot of you said you needed those, but you didn't think they would be needed maybe in other places. Is a cell phone a need or a want? What's interesting here about cell phones and other places, so we sometimes have this idea that in other countries that we have a bunch of technology and they don't, right? At least in my experience, when I was doing my field work in Ecuador and in Colombia, they adopted cell phones much faster than in the United States. And one of the reasons they did that is because they didn't actually have landline phones. So if you want to take a place and put in a bunch of landlines, that is a long and hard process to do. But then all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a second. We don't need landlines. We don't need telephone poles. We don't need stuff underground. We'll just put up a bunch of cell phone towers and have everybody have a cell phone. And so pretty soon they didn't have telephones at home, but pretty soon everybody had a cell phone. Again, faster in percentage terms than what happened in the United States. And the first time that I ever learned to text was actually, they learned it faster in Ecuador, Colombia, lots of parts of Africa actually were the ones who were the pioneers on texting. Why would they be pioneers on texting? Sort of the old days. You probably don't remember the old days, but in the old days, it was super expensive to talk to somebody on the phone, a cell phone. That was like $1 per minute. But if you just sent a quick text, it would be like cheap. And so they actually were texting long before we were. So for them, in some ways, the cell phone was an interesting early adapters of those things. Now I feel like people talk more because unlimited plan, you can do whatever you want. Bon and Bao, who is actually a Hartwick alum, wrote this book a while ago called Text. No, anyway, there's his number. And he came back to Hartwick to give us a lecture, and he gave us a surprising statistic. This was back when phones looked kind of like that. He said something to the effect that 95% of the world has a cell phone and only 90% has a toothbrush. or that cell phones are more widespread than toothbrushes. Never be able to, oh my gosh. Now, I guess what if you think about it, why does everybody gasp when they learn that more people have cell phones than toothbrushes? Why does that make us go, what, really? That's what we think, right? You think you need a toothbrush, whereas a cell phone, you don't need that, but you need a toothbrush. However, those of you who've been in a biological anthropology class or maybe a hunters and gatherers class, oops, I'm giving it away. Who has the best teeth in the world? Actually,
Fine, they have good veneers.
hunters and gatherers usually in the olden days had the best teeth because they had that gritty food. You didn't need to have toothbrushes because as long as you're not consuming large amounts of processed food and sugar, the grittiness cleans out your teeth on its own. So actually, you don't need a toothbrush if you're eating the right kind of food. Like I said, don't try this because we don't eat that way and we never will be able to. But in some ways, the toothbrush is less of a need, I would say, than a cell phone. Because what human need does a cell phone meet? It's perhaps even more basic than toothbrushes. Yeah. Communication, right? Human language. In some ways, toothbrush is just a socially created need, but the need to communicate, speak to each other, is huge. So again, a little bit of playing around with the idea of needs and wants and hegemony.